About 15 minutes from downtown St. Louis, past the gas stations and the truck stops and the kind of flat brown scenery you'd drive straight through without ever lifting your foot off the pedal, there is a hill. Except it isn't a hill, it was built by hand, one basket of dirt at a time, by people who raised an entire city on this spot around 800 years ago. A city bigger than London, with pyramids and a sun temple and mass graves full of young women. And almost no American has ever heard of it, even though it was sitting in their backyard the whole time. And the part that should bother you isn't how this place rose, it's how thoroughly somebody made sure you'd never picture it at all. So let's start small, because the small version is already strange enough. Around the year 1250, while Europe was busy with cathedrals and the plague was still a couple of centuries away from ruining everyone's decade, there was a city in what is now southern Illinois that held somewhere between 10 and 20,000 people. And if you count the towns and farmsteads spilling out around it, what archaeologists call Greater Cahokia, you're looking at maybe 40 or 50,000, which made it larger than London at the very same moment in history. And here's the detail that tends to land wrong in people's heads. No city inside the future borders of the United States would be that big again until Philadelphia in the 1700s, more than 5 centuries later. So for 500 years, the largest city in America had already been built, lived in, and abandoned before the country that would forget it even existed. And it had a pyramid. We don't usually use that word for North America, we save it for Egypt and Mexico, but there is no better one for Monks Mound, the thing that looks like a grassy hill from the highway. It rises about 100 feet, 10 full stories, off the flat floodplain, and its base covers around 14 acres, which means its footprint is wider than the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Sit with that for a second. The largest earthen structure in the entire ancient Americas, north or south, is in Illinois. And the people who built it had no wheel, no draft animals, no metal tools, nothing but stone, wood, woven baskets, and a frankly unsettling amount of patience. Because they moved this mountain one basket load of soil at a time, millions of them, on their backs. On the flat summit, where today there's just grass and a few tourists catching their breath, there once stood a great wooden building, the house and temple of the ruler, the man the later records of these cultures called something like the Great Sun, who looked down from the top of a hand-built mountain at the city he ran. And it stayed the tallest human-made structure anywhere in what's now the United States until 1867. Half a mile west of that mountain, they kept time, there was a wide circle of tall wooden posts standing upright in the ground. And people have taken to calling it the American Woodhenge, which is cute, but it undersells the thing, because this wasn't decoration, it was an instrument. The posts were placed so precisely that, standing at the center on the morning of the spring or autumn equinox, you would watch the sun climb up out of the horizon and appear to rise directly out of the front of Monks Mound, half a mile away, as if the temple on the hill were giving birth to the day. They built 5 of these circles over the years, each one larger than the last, tracking the solstices and the equinoxes and the turning of the farming year, telling thousands of people when to plant, when to harvest, when to gather, and when to hold whatever it was they held up there. A Stone Age society in the American Midwest reading the sky with the accuracy of an observatory. And most of us grew up thinking the most advanced thing happening on this continent before Columbus was somebody chipping an arrowhead. Now the stakes start to climb, because at some point this city got scared. Around the middle of the 1100s, the people of Cahokia built a wall, a wooden palisade nearly 2 miles long, wrapping the central precinct, Monks Mound, and the great plaza in front of it, sealing the heart of the city off from everything outside. And to build it, they cut and sank something like 20,000 logs into the ground, a forest's worth of timber. And they fitted it with evenly spaced bastions, towers from which defenders could shoot down at anyone who came close. And then, and this is the part that says the quiet thing out loud, They tore it down and rebuilt it, again and again, roughly 4 times. You do not rebuild a 2-mile fortress wall 4 separate times for fun. You do it because something out there keeps coming, or because something inside has gone wrong and the people in charge no longer trust the people who aren't. And either way, the postcard version of a peaceful, sun-worshipping farming town starts to crack. And underneath it, you can see a city that was very much afraid of something. And then there's Mound 72. In the 1960s, an archaeologist named Melvin Fowler started digging into a low, unremarkable ridge of earth at the edge of the site. And what he pulled out of it is still one of the most disturbing discoveries ever made in North American archaeology. Because inside that one modest mound were the remains of more than 270 people. At the center lay an important figure, laid out on a bed of over 20,000 polished shell beads arranged in the shape of a great bird, a falcon, a birdman from their mythology. And buried with him and around him, the others, some clearly honored, high-status men and women sent into the ground with treasures, copper, sheets of mica, hundreds of perfect arrowheads gathered from across the continent. But most of them tell a much darker story. Because there are mass graves here, pits holding 20, 40, more than 50 bodies at once, and laid out in neat, careful rows inside them, young women, dozens upon dozens of them, almost all the same age, with no wounds on their bones, which is somehow worse, because it means they weren't killed in a fight. They were most likely strangled or quietly bled to death and then arranged. And then there is the other pit. 39 people, men and women, who were not arranged at all, who show every kind of violence you can imagine. Fractured skulls, stone points still lodged in bone, heads removed. And some of them, the evidence suggests, were not entirely dead when they went into the ground. For a long time, people assumed these victims must have been outsiders, prisoners dragged in from somewhere far away, because that's a more comfortable thing to believe. But the chemistry locked into their teeth and bones says no. Most of them grew up right here, drinking the same water, eating the same corn as the people who killed them. And the burials don't look like a single terrible event. They appear to repeat, roughly once a generation, as if this was simply a thing the city did, on schedule, a price that came due again and again. And it is the largest concentration of human sacrifice ever found anywhere north of Mexico, carried out 15 minutes from a place where today you can order a drive-through coffee. So here is a city bigger than London, with a pyramid wider than Giza's, a working solar observatory, a defensive wall built and rebuilt in fear, and ritual killing carried out for generations. And then it stops. By around 1350, maybe a little after, Cahokia is essentially empty, not conquered, not burned down by an enemy, not wiped out by European disease, because the Europeans hadn't arrived yet. They wouldn't lay eyes on this valley for another 200 years. And by then, there was nothing left to see but grass-covered mounds and not one person who could tell them who built it. The people had simply left, drifted away in every direction, and the great experiment was over. And the honest answer to why is that nobody knows. There are theories, and the good ones keep fighting each other. There was a long run of drought, dry decades that would have strangled the corn the whole city lived on. There was the return of the great floods, the Mississippi rising again after centuries of calm and drowning the fields right as the climate was already turning colder across the whole hemisphere. There's warfare. That wall didn't build itself. And there's the slow poison of politics, a society that may have simply broken from the inside. It's people losing faith in the rulers on the mountain and in gods who apparently kept asking for their daughters. For decades, the favorite explanation was that they wrecked their own environment, cut down too many trees, caused erosion and flooding, and doomed themselves. A tidy little morality tale perfectly shaped for the modern age. Except that when archaeologists actually went out and dug for that evidence in the last few years, they couldn't find it. The soil refused to back the story up. So the official cause of death of the greatest city in ancient North America is, to this day, unknown. And maybe that's the truest thing about the place, that it was that big, that organized, that frightening, and we still cannot tell you for certain what killed it. But I saved the worst part for last. The part that turns this from a sad story into an almost insulting one. Because Cahokia wasn't even alone. Right across the river, where downtown St. Louis stands today, there was a second whole cluster of these mounds. Dozens of them, raised by the same world. And the area was so defined by them that one of St. Louis's earliest nicknames was Mound City, a name that ended up stamped on businesses and banks and civic pride all over town. And then, in the 1800s, with the railroads arriving and the land suddenly worth real money, the good people of Mound City looked at the mounds, the actual mounds, the thing their city was named after, and decided they were in the way. The biggest of them, called Big Mound, more than 300 feet long and over 30 feet tall, was scraped down and carted off in 1869. And the dirt, the same earth that ancient hands had hauled up basket by basket, was sold to a railroad company and dumped as fill to level out the train tracks. And as they tore it apart, they found graves inside it, copper ornaments, the bones of the dead, and almost none of it was saved. And one by one, the rest of the mounds went the same way, until out of all of them, exactly one is still standing in the city today. So a civilization built a metropolis here that rivaled London, watched the sun rise out of a mountain they made by hand, killed for it, walled itself in against a fear we will never name, and then vanished for reasons we still can't prove. And a second city rose directly on top of the first, named itself after the wonders it inherited, and quietly shoveled them into a railroad embankment. And that, more than the pyramids, more than the graves, might just be the most American thing in this entire story. A place that buried the people who came before, sold them off by the wagon load, and then forgot it ever had to.